The stepmother forced the stepdaughter to marry a beggar to humiliate her, but on the wedding day, the secret he revealed shocked everyone. But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. Charleston, South Carolina was a city known for its charm, history, and whispers of old Southern secrets. Amid its cobblestone streets and magnolia-lined avenues lived Sarah Harper, a young woman whose life was anything but charming. After the untimely death of her mother, Sarah's father remarried a woman named Eleanor, cold, calculating, and ever resentful of Sarah's natural grace and warmth. When Sarah's father passed away under suspicious circumstances, Eleanor took control of the family estate and relegated Sarah to a life of servitude. Eleanor despised Sarah's resilience and kindness, traits that shone even in the face of relentless cruelty. Determined to crush her spirit, Eleanor devised a humiliating scheme. She announced Sarah's sudden engagement to Henry, the beggar who loitered near the market square. To Eleanor, this wasn't just a marriage, it was a public spectacle meant to disgrace Sarah and cement her position as the true mistress of the Harper name. Henry, the so-called beggar, was a peculiar figure. He wore tattered clothes and moved with the air of someone accustomed to hardship, but there was something unusual about his manner. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and his sharp, observing eyes seemed to know more than he let on. Despite his mysterious demeanor, he was considered by many to be a harmless outcast. Sarah begged Eleanor to reconsider, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. "A dutiful daughter does as she's told," Eleanor sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "Or would you prefer to live on the streets alongside your husband-to-be?" Left without options, Sarah resigned herself to her fate. The wedding was scheduled within a week, a rushed, shameless affair that mirrored Eleanor's disdain. The day arrived under a heavy sky, with dark clouds casting a shadow over the ceremony. A handful of guests, hand-picked by Eleanor to witness Sarah's humiliation, gathered in the grand, dilapidated garden of the Harper estate. They whispered amongst themselves, exchanging cruel laughs as the bride stepped forward in a simple white dress, her head held high despite the weight of her humiliation. When Henry appeared, there was an audible murmur. His ragged suit was clean, but his demeanor was as composed and steady as a nobleman's. Eleanor's lips tightened as he approached, her calculating gaze flickering with something unspoken. Henry offered his hand to Sarah, and though hesitant, she took it. As they exchanged vows, Sarah couldn't shake the odd tension in the air. Eleanor's usual smugness seemed diluted, replaced by a subtle unease. And Henry, for all his outward humility, held an expression that seemed to hide far more than he revealed. By the time the ceremony concluded, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was she the only one here being humiliated? Or was there a game at play that she hadn't yet understood? The wedding feast was a modest affair, arranged hastily and with little care for appearances. Eleanor had ensured the event was just extravagant enough to highlight Sarah's apparent fall from grace. The once grand dining hall of the Harper estate was dimly lit, its peeling wallpaper and worn furniture a reflection of the family's crumbling fortune. A small group of guests sat at the table, a mix of Eleanor's equally callous acquaintances and a few curious townsfolk eager for gossip. Henry sat beside Sarah, his demeanor calm yet enigmatic. His rough hands rested on the table, and though his clothing still bore signs of poverty, there was an undeniable poise to his movements. Sarah, dressed simply in a faded gown, borrowed from a distant cousin, sat quietly, her mind racing. Every whispered insult and pointed laugh from the guests chipped away at her resolve, but she refused to meet Eleanor's smug gaze. Henry, on the other hand, seemed utterly unfazed. He observed the room with a sharpness that did not match his supposed station in life. When the conversation turned to his background, he answered with short but thoughtful responses, deflecting direct inquiries with a polite smile. "I've lived many lives," he said at one point, raising his glass to the room. "This one has been the most enlightening." The remark silenced the table momentarily, an unexpected weight behind his words. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her goblet, but she quickly masked her reaction with a forced laugh. As the evening wore on, Henry began to take subtle control of the room. What started as idle small talk turned into an intricate dance of words. He asked pointed questions to the guests, steering conversations toward tales of betrayal, greed, and loss. Every question seemed to cut through the shallow veneer of politeness that coated the evening, unsettling Eleanor's friends and silencing their jabs at Sarah. Then, unexpectedly, Henry turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice steady and calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of authority. "You've built quite a legacy here. It's remarkable, really. But I wonder, has it come at a cost?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Eleanor's face stiffened, but she quickly regained her composure. "I don't know what you mean," she replied coldly. Henry smiled faintly. "Oh, I think you do. Legacies often come with secrets, and secrets, well, they have a way of surfacing, don't they?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. The flickering candlelight seemed to exaggerate every expression, every nervous glance exchanged between the guests. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she looked between Henry and Eleanor, unsure of what game was unfolding before her. Eleanor's laughter broke the silence, a hollow and brittle sound. "How fascinating," she said. "A beggar with a flair for theatrics. Perhaps we should have hired you to entertain the guests rather than marry my stepdaughter." But there was a tremor in her voice, faint but unmistakable. Henry leaned back in his chair, unbothered by her attempt at deflection. "Ah, well," he said with a knowing smile, "there's still plenty of the evening left. Who knows what other surprises it might bring?" Sarah's unease grew. Henry's words felt less like a response and more like a warning, one that Eleanor, for the first time, seemed to take seriously. The air in the Harper dining hall grew heavier with each passing moment. The lively chatter from earlier had dissolved into murmurs, and the candlelight now cast sharp shadows across the room. Eleanor's smug confidence seemed to erode with every passing second as Henry continued to guide the evening's conversation with an unsettling precision. Sarah couldn't understand why Eleanor, who had always been so domineering, now seemed unsteady. The matriarch sat rigid in her chair, her hand gripping the armrest with enough force to turn her knuckles white. Henry, meanwhile, was completely at ease, sipping his wine with the poise of someone who belonged at the head of the table. Then, Henry cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him as he placed his glass down with deliberate care. "It's not every day a man like me finds himself in a room such as this," he began, his voice steady and resonant. "It's humbling, really. But it's also a reminder of how easily fortunes can shift." "What do you mean by that?" asked one of the guests, a man with an overinflated sense of his own importance. Henry smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, I mean nothing personal, of course. It's just that life has a way of surprising us. One moment, you're at the top of the world, and the next, well, you might find yourself walking the streets with little more than the clothes on your back." The words hung in the air, and Sarah noticed the slightest twitch in Eleanor's expression. Henry leaned forward slightly, addressing the room but keeping his gaze fixed on Eleanor. "Take me, for example," he continued. "Once upon a time I wasn't a beggar at all. I lived in a house larger than this one, with grounds so vast you could lose yourself in them. I dined with people who called themselves the elite, but all of it was taken from me in an instant." The room was silent now, save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Even the most cynical of the guests seemed riveted by Henry's words. "How did that happen?" Sarah found herself asking, her voice soft but steady. Henry turned to her, his gaze softening. "Betrayal," he said simply, "by someone I trusted, someone who saw an opportunity and seized it, no matter the cost." He let the weight of his words settle before continuing. "It's funny how betrayal works, isn't it? It's never just about money or power. It's about the small things, the lies, the secrets, the whispers behind closed doors. But in the end, the truth always finds its way to the surface." Sarah glanced at Eleanor, whose facade was beginning to crack. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and a faint sheen of sweat glistened on her brow. Henry's gaze didn't waver. "Of course," he added, "some secrets take longer to reveal themselves than others. And some truths, well, they're worth waiting for." Eleanor abruptly stood, the legs of her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Enough of this nonsense," she snapped. "We're here to celebrate a wedding, not to indulge the ramblings of a man with delusions of grandeur." But her outburst only drew more attention. The guests, once eager to laugh at Sarah's expense, now looked to Eleanor with unease. Henry stood as well, though his movements were slow and deliberate. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Harper," he said, his tone courteous but laced with something sharper. "This is a night for revelations, not distractions, and I think it's time we get to the heart of the matter." He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and retrieved a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it carefully, he held it up for the room to see. "This," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "is a record of a rather significant transaction. A transaction made by none other than Eleanor Harper." Gasps rippled through the room as Eleanor's composure crumbled entirely. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Henry stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The inheritance you stole, the life you destroyed. It's all here, Eleanor. And tonight, the truth comes out." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her inheritance. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what Henry was saying. Could this be the reason Eleanor had gone to such lengths to ruin her life? Henry turned to the room, his voice rising with purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may think me a beggar, but tonight you'll see that appearances can be deceiving." The atmosphere in the dining hall was suffocating. Every guest sat frozen, their eyes darting between Henry and Eleanor. The sound of the rain outside, which had begun as a gentle drizzle, now hammered against the windows, adding an ominous backdrop to the unfolding drama. Sarah's mind swirled with questions, but she kept her eyes on Henry, who stood firm, the mysterious paper still clutched in his hand. Eleanor tried to regain control of the situation, her voice laced with desperation. "This is absurd!" she exclaimed, her composure slipping further with each word. "Why would anyone believe the ramblings of a beggar? This is a farce, nothing more." Henry's gaze didn't waver. "Is it?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Or is it the truth you've been so desperate to bury?" He unfolded the paper again, this time holding it out to Sarah. "This belongs to you, Sarah," he said, his tone gentler now. "It's proof of what has been stolen from you, your inheritance, your birthright. Everything that your parents worked so hard to leave behind for you." Sarah hesitated, her trembling hands reaching for the document. As her eyes scanned the words, she felt a wave of shock and anger wash over her. It was all there, in black and white. The forged signatures, the illegal transfers, and the money funneled into Eleanor's personal accounts. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," Henry replied. "And it's only the beginning." The guests murmured amongst themselves, their curiosity now mixed with growing disdain for Eleanor. One of them, a woman who had always been a loyal ally of Eleanor, leaned forward. "Eleanor," she said, her voice sharp, "is this true? Did you steal from your own stepdaughter?" Eleanor's mask of confidence shattered completely. "I did what I had to do," she spat, her voice venomous. "Do you think running an estate like this is easy? Do you think Sarah had any idea how to manage it? She would have squandered everything. I protected the Harper name." "Protected it?" Henry's voice cut through like a blade. "You used it to line your own pockets. You destroyed Sarah's future and betrayed the trust of the family who welcomed you into their lives. But you didn't stop there, did you, Eleanor? You didn't just take their money. You took their lives." The room collectively gasped. Eleanor's face turned pale, and for a moment she seemed to shrink before their eyes. What are you talking about?" she stammered. Henry stepped closer, his tone icy. "I'm talking about Sarah's father, your husband, the man who trusted you, who believed in you, the man who died under suspicious circumstances just as he began questioning the state of the family's finances." "No!" Eleanor shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "You have no proof! This is all lies!" Henry's expression darkened. "Oh, but I do," he said, reaching into his coat pocket once more. This time he produced a small, leather-bound journal. "Your husband kept meticulous records, Eleanor. He suspected you long before his death, and he left behind everything he uncovered. Poison, falsified documents, bribes. Your trail is all here." The guests recoiled, some standing from their seats in disbelief. Eleanor's once loyal allies turned on her, their whispered support now replaced by open accusations. Sarah, overwhelmed by the revelations, rose from her seat. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was unshakable. "You stole from me, you manipulated my life, and now I find out you might have killed my father?" She stepped closer to Eleanor, her eyes burning with years of suppressed anger. "You've done nothing but tear this family apart." Eleanor, cornered, looked frantically around the room for support, but none came. Finally, she turned her attention to Henry. "And you," she hissed, "who are you to accuse me? You're nothing but a beggar, a fraud." Henry's lips curled into a faint smile. "A beggar?" he repeated, his voice dripping with irony. "Perhaps that's what I seemed. But appearances, as you should know by now, can be deceiving." He straightened his posture, his voice growing stronger. "My name is Henry Sinclair. I was once a successful businessman with lands and wealth of my own. Until a schemer like you betrayed me. I lost everything, but I learned to rebuild. When I heard rumors of your crimes, Eleanor, I knew I couldn't stand by. I became what I needed to be to uncover the truth." The room fell silent again as his words settled. Sarah turned to Henry, her eyes wide with shock. "You're not a beggar." "No, Sarah," Henry replied, his voice softening. "And I didn't marry you to humiliate you. I married you because I saw your strength, your kindness, and your heart, and I wanted to help you reclaim what's rightfully yours." The weight of his confession hung heavy in the air. Eleanor, realizing her defeat, collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of despair. Sarah, though shaken, felt something stir within her, a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. The room erupted into chaos. Guests stood, their voices a mixture of shock, condemnation, and whispered disbelief. Eleanor, once a commanding presence, now appeared small and defeated, slumped in her chair with tears streaming down her face. Her carefully constructed web of lies had unraveled, leaving her exposed and powerless. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, grief, and relief. For years, she had endured Eleanor's cruelty, believing herself powerless. But now, armed with the truth, she felt a strength rising within her, a resolve she had long buried. Henry moved to her side, his steady presence anchoring her amidst the storm. "What happens next is up to you, Sarah," he said gently, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Sarah's gaze shifted to the guests, then back to Eleanor. Taking a deep breath, She raised her voice to address the room. You've all borne witness to the truth tonight. For years, Eleanor Harper has manipulated and deceived not just me, but everyone who placed their trust in her. She stole my inheritance, tarnished my family's name, and now, it seems, may have had a hand in my father's death. Her words were met with murmurs of agreement and outrage. Eleanor looked up, her face twisted in desperation. "Sarah, please," she begged. "I did it all for the family, for you. Don't throw me to the wolves. I'm still your stepmother." Sarah's expression hardened. "You lost the right to call yourself family the moment you betrayed us. I'll see to it that justice is served. You'll answer for what you've done." Turning to Henry, Sarah added, "And I'll need your help to make sure she doesn't escape accountability." Henry nodded. "You have my word." The evening concluded in turmoil. Guests began to depart, some whispering promises to testify against Eleanor, others simply eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Eleanor was taken away to her quarters, under the watchful eye of Henry's trusted associates, men Sarah hadn't noticed before, but who now revealed themselves as his allies in uncovering the truth. As the last of the guests departed, Sarah and Henry remained in the dining hall, the weight of the night settling over them. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, its rhythm soothing in the stillness. Sarah turned to Henry, her voice soft. "You didn't have to do this for me. Why risk so much for someone you barely know?" Henry smiled, the weariness in his expression softened by genuine affection. "Because I saw something in you, Sarah. Your strength, your kindness. It reminded me of what I'd lost and what I still hope to find. And the more I learned about you, the more I realized I couldn't walk away. You deserve the life that was stolen from you, and I wanted to help you reclaim it." For a moment, Sarah was silent, her emotions too overwhelming for words. Finally, she said, "Thank you, Henry, for everything." Over the following weeks, Eleanor was brought to justice. Investigations confirmed her role in embezzling Sarah's inheritance and revealed new evidence tying her to the suspicious death of Sarah's father. The courts swiftly acted, stripping Eleanor of her remaining influence and sentencing her to pay for her crimes. With Henry's help, Sarah reclaimed control of the Harper estate. The once neglected property was revitalized, its grounds flourishing under her care. Sarah used her restored wealth not for vanity, but to support the community, ensuring that the Harper legacy was one of generosity and integrity. Henry, too, played a crucial role in this new chapter. His sharp mind and resourcefulness proved invaluable, not just in restoring the estate, but in earning Sarah's trust and affection. Their bond deepened with time, and what began as an alliance of necessity blossomed into genuine love. On a crisp spring morning, standing beneath the blooming magnolias in the estate's garden, Henry proposed to Sarah, this time not as a beggar, but as a man reborn. "Sarah Harper," he said, kneeling before her, "you've shown me what it means to hope again, to believe in something greater than myself. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not out of obligation, but out of love?" Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she smiled and nodded. "Yes, Henry, yes, 1,000 times." Their wedding was nothing like the first, a joyous celebration filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of true friends. The community that Sarah and Henry had worked so hard to uplift came together to honor their union, marking the beginning of a life built on trust, love, and shared purpose. As they danced beneath the stars that evening, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. What had begun as a story of loss and betrayal had become one of resilience and redemption, and as Henry held her close, whispering promises of a bright future, Sarah knew that they had both found their way home.